Good evening. My name is Dodie Anderson. I'm the coordinator of Transitions Missoula, and I'd like to welcome you here tonight. First, I'd like to make an announcement. This presentation is being recorded by Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistance grant donated to Transition Missoula by MCAT. For more information, visit mcat.org. Okay, my presentation is a brief presentation on transition streets. This is what Transition Missoula is focused on right now. So it's a guidebook for neighbors to build resilience together. Transition Streets helps you save money, and it provides a curated guidebook to change, empowering neighborhoods with proven actions to conserve energy, water, reduce waste, and save money. Transition Streets builds community resilience as we face the increasing impact of climate change and political uncertainty. Now is the time to build our resilience by taking action in our homes and with our neighbors. Transition Streets is one street at a time. Transition brings neighbors together to implement simple household changes, turning fear into action and building communities street by street. What do we do for you to help you get started? As Transition Missoula, we'll meet with you and give you guidance on how to start a Transition Streets group in your neighborhood. We make materials needed available at low or no cost. We attend the first meeting with you and your Transition Streets group. We remain available if you have questions and need support. And we attend your last group meeting and then share your group experiences. And what do you do if you'd like to start a Transition Streets group? Meet with a Transition Missoula person and learn how to start the group in your neighborhood. Contact people in your neighborhood to find out those that would be interested in being part of a Transition Streets group. Hold a first meeting with interested neighbors and a Transition Missoula helper, and attend a total of 7 meetings guided by the Transition Streets manual, and then celebrate your group's experiences. So there's 2 ways. If you're interested in possibly starting a Transition Streets group, you can sign on the sign-up sheet in the back, and we'll give you information and contact you. Or you can go to our website, transitionmissoula.org, and there's more information there and a way to contact us. So I thank you, and that is it. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Rebecca Bindick from the University of Montana Geosciences, where she'll explain the great resource that she's provided to Missoula.
So I'm Rebecca Bendick. I'm a geosciences professor at the University of Montana. And I'm here today to tell you about a project that one of my now former graduate students and I have been working on for the past 3 or 4 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about the background and what's behind it, and then also what we're looking at for the future. And I think it's a really good fit to the Transition Streets project, because the point of this tool, which is called Missoula Ready, is to provide information that people can use easily to help themselves be better prepared and more resilient in the case of natural disasters. And my interest in this topic comes really out of my original research topic. So I'm a geophysicist, and my primary study is on kind of the physics of earthquakes and how they work, and it's all very mathy and esoteric, and most people find it deeply unpleasant. But it turns out that when you study earthquakes, you inevitably have to go to places where there are giant earthquakes. And so my group at the University of Montana maintains a rapid response capability there, where we can leave our lab in an hour or less to go to areas of major natural disasters, especially earthquakes. And I've been doing this kind of work for 20 years or so now, which means that I've gone to a lot of disaster zones. So here's a photograph that I took at the site of the Nepal earthquake in 2015, so the Nepal Gorkha event. And we've been to places that look a lot like this, kind of over and over and over again. Starting, my first rapid response was to the Bhuj earthquake in 2001, which was in northwest India, but we've responded to earthquakes in Iran and Pakistan and Tajikistan and Nepal, East Africa, and we've also provided technical support to the Sumatra tsunami event and some tsunami expertise there. And so even though when we go to these places, what we're doing is kind of analyzing the fancy physics of how the earth responded to shaking and all of this, you inevitably are confronted with the realization that earthquakes are mostly about people. So although earthquakes and all other natural hazards are kind of the inevitable consequence of the planet that we live on and how it shapes itself over time, how tectonic plates move, or how water gets from high elevation to low elevation, or how, forests renew themselves, these kinds of processes become disasters, not in and of themselves, but because of how they impact the human communities that have these things happen all around them. And so what we came to realize is that the most critical piece of making the impact of natural disasters less is not stopping the natural process, which we certainly cannot do, but helping people to understand what's going on and helping them to be better prepared. So my own PhD advisor has a long record on this topic, and his kind of favorite quote, and I think one that sums it up beautifully, is earthquakes don't kill people, buildings in earthquakes kill people. And so that means that even though we can't stop these things from happening, we can take a lot of steps to prepare ourselves better for when they inevitably do happen. Unless you think this is a small problem, this is a summary. It's a little obsolete now. The last year they counted is 2014. This comes from a collaboration of the World Bank, the UN, and a company called Munich Re to try to estimate the amount of impact that natural disasters have on human communities. And you can see these numbers are big. I mean, they're not big, they're huge, right? They're really big. $1.4 trillion of total economic losses in just your average decade of disasters, 1.7 billion people affected, and 700,000 people killed by natural disasters in a very typical decade. And if we extrapolate this forward into a kind of planet where climate is changing very rapidly, we expect these numbers to go up, if anything. So flat or up for disasters. So this is something that we should do better because these impacts are very, very large. So one of the things that I and my graduate students did is to ask ourselves the question, well, does preparedness actually help? Does providing people with basic information about natural hazards and encouraging them to take the initiative to prepare themselves, how might it impact those bottom line numbers that I just showed you? And the way we did this thought experiment, since we can't just impose a giant disaster onto communities, one that we told them about it and one that we didn't, that wouldn't be a very nice thing to do. Neither could I orchestrate something so dramatic. But what we did is took two pairs of earthquakes that are very, very similar in terms of their physics, right? So this pair, the Sumatra event and the Tohoku, Japan event, Those are both the same magnitude earthquakes, pretty much. They both had tsunamis. They both happened in places where there are high density populations. Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah, please stop me.
Do you control the focus on that?
I do not control the focus
Okay.
on that. Yeah, sorry, it's really crowded.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I should have said that at the beginning. Stop me, ask me questions, yell at me, let's talk about this. I don't need to lecture at you guys, but I'm just kind of, I don't know, throwing some stuff out there. And there will be lots of time for discussion after. But, okay, back to this unfocused slide. These are little people. Each of those represents 1,000 fatalities. I'll try to annotate the slides a little better since they're hard to see. This pair of earthquakes, totally identical in the kind of fundamentals of the shaking. And the difference between Japan and Indonesia is that in Japan, everybody knows about earthquakes and how they work and take lots and lots of steps to be prepared, which is not to say that 15,703 fatalities is no big deal. But if you compare that to Indonesia, where most of the people living in the area that's threatened by very large earthquakes know almost nothing about earthquakes and how they work and what they can do to be prepared, you can see the difference that preparedness makes and a sort of understanding of the process and steps, even small steps taken to mitigate the impacts. I think this pair of earthquakes is even more spectacular an illustration of this principle. So the Port-au-Prince, Haiti earthquake and the Loma Prieta earthquake, which many people remember because it was during the World Series in 1989. These again couldn't be, they're identical twins of earthquakes. Same magnitude basically, actually this one's slightly bigger, same in this case actually. Same type of earthquake, both strike slip, both cutting through a major urban area with fairly comparable population densities. If you look at all the fancy plots and analysis, the kind of distribution of shaking in these two events is identical. Look at the difference in the impact these two twin events had, and the difference is all about the human side of this equation, right? Earthquakes, same. People, totally different. When people in California are prepared for earthquakes, the infrastructure is designed to, if not withstand the expected shaking, at least kind of vaguely withstand the expected shaking, and people know what to do. School kids there, have earthquake drills in their classes, and residents there get pamphlets in the mail about, you live in earthquake country, here's what you can do. People in Haiti have no access to information about natural hazards, how they work, how to mitigate them, and they also don't really have the resources to take mitigation steps. And so we're talking about, 4 orders of magnitude difference in the number of fatalities in an event. So I think this slide really makes the case to say, okay, we can't stop natural disasters from happening, but if we are ready for them, even in small ways, fewer people die. And to me, fewer people dying is a good thing. And then if you tot up the economic losses as well and the kind of long-term impacts to communities that major disasters cause, if you can be prepared in advance, this is definitely, inarguably, a gain. And maybe you think from that last slide, well, this is something that happens in the developing world. We're all good here. We know what to do. Japan, the US, we're ready for stuff. But if you scale this problem down a little bit, you come to realize that some of those discrepancies in people's knowledge about natural disasters and how to mitigate their impact also happens here in the United States. So this is the Oso landslide. It happened in March of 2014. Here's a before and an after picture, again, fuzzy as can be, unfortunately, But what may, hopefully you can see, if not, I'll point out to you, there's a neighborhood right here. And this neighborhood was basically wiped off the face of the earth by the collapse of this hillside that dammed the Oso River here and then swept over that neighborhood, killing several dozen people in the process and causing many tens of millions of economic damage. And so maybe you would say, well, this is an act of God. There's no way people could have known about it or mitigated it. But if you look in the scientific literature, this is the area of the Oso landslide. But all of these colored blobs here, so this is a map view here. So this is the river that you saw. This red blob is the Oso landslide that killed people. But all of these other colored blobs are landslides that have happened in the past 5,000 years in this area. So there was an incredible trove of scientific evidence to suggest that this area is at incredibly high risk for landslides. It's just the same problem as Haiti and earthquakes. The people who were exposed to the maximum amount of risk had no easy access to that information, and as a consequence, they suffered tremendous losses. Some people lost their lives, many people lost their homes. So thinking about this at this scale makes me think about me and my neighbors and my own communities. What hazards exist in western Montana? How serious are they? What do they look like? What are the plausible scenarios? And then, do my neighbors, do you guys have access to the information that you need to be prepared so that you can be in an event that has that very small number of fatalities and low economic impacts rather than the same event where the consequences are catastrophic? And so we thought to ourselves a lot, to what extent is the scientific known information about natural hazards in this area accessible to people in ways that they can easily use it? And we identified 4 big problems that make it really hard. One is the data are really hard to find. So if you make a list of what kinds of hazards might happen here, storms, earthquakes, floods, landslides, what you see is there are really good scientific data, just like that OSO map, for all of these types of hazards for Missoula County, but they're spread out all over the place. Some are at NOAA, some are at the USGS, FEMA has stuff, the Forest Service has stuff, but they're really dispersed, and you have to know where to find the scientific data. So you already have to be really savvy to track these data down.
Could you read that list of the different, I can't.
The hazards?
Yeah, I can't.
You know what? I can't, I'm happy to, but we're going to talk about what they all are.
Oh.
Ad nauseum, probably. So tiny bit of patience and we'll get to it for sure. If you can find the data you want, they're very technical. So this is a map of Missoula that's color-coded by the floodplain categories set by FEMA. And you can see they're okay, there's shaded X, there's A, there's AO, there's AH. What the hell are those things? You have to really be expert to know what that means. And even if you know that AE is the 100-year flood elevation, well, what does that look like? If I were standing there, what would happen? Would my toes get wet? Or would my house be floating by? What do these things actually mean if you have to experience them? The technical data are not very good at communicating that kind of information. Here's the earthquake example. It's even more hideous. I mean, I've spent my entire life working on earthquakes, and these maps are in percentage of G, which is gravitational acceleration, that you expect to see during peak acceleration as the wave train goes by. So I expect that means absolutely nothing to all of you guys. You might think okay, red is usually bad. on maps like this, but how bad? Like, if you have accelerations of greater than 1g, it means things fly up into the air, right? Because you're accelerating them more than gravity. So greater than 1g, house flies into air, bad, right? But what does 0.2g, what does that feel like? What does that do? And how might I get ready for it? None of these data sets are amenable to that kind of use. Problem number 3, not paired with recommendations. So even if I know, even if I can find these technical data, I can interpret them in some kind of way with my technical expertise, what am I supposed to do about it? So I live in a floodplain. What should I do? What are the best practices? Should I freak out? Should I sell my house? Should I raise my house up on stilts? Should I just buy a couple of sandbags and keep them in the basement? What are the best practices for the scenario that I'm likely to see? And then the last one, not customized. So you can, in addition to like hunting down all those data about natural hazards, you can hunt down the recommendations for like, what are you supposed to do in an earthquake? What are you supposed to do if a wildfire is burning? FEMA in particular has lots of like fact sheets and recommendations. But do you need to know this for where you live? Are you in a place where you should be thinking about earthquake preparedness or not? I mean, I can read about hurricane stuff, but I live in Missoula, so I shouldn't freak out about that. I can freak out about something totally different that's more relevant to me and in my life. And it turns out that natural disasters are very, very patchy in space. So what I should be prepared for might be really different than the people who live in a different neighborhood in Missoula, than the people who live up in the Swan, than the people who live in Lolo. And so I'd like to know for my house, yeah, I love everybody, but I want to know about me and my family. Like, what are we supposed to be ready for? So when we went through everything that was available, we realized that these 4 problems are very real, very urgent barriers to having people be prepared for natural disasters. And so we decided to create a product that addresses them. And we sat down and we made a list and said, the best tool that we could make, what characteristics would it have? And we decided it should have the best available science. So those data layers behind everything, those should be rockin'. They should be awesome. They should represent the very best that we know right now. But it should also include the best communication practices. So like all kinds of decades of social science about how do you take technical information and make it usable for people who aren't technically savvy. Integrated messaging, so you should be getting the message that both the city of Missoula and the Missoula County Emergency Services and FEMA and the state all want you to have. What's the right message for a particular scenario? We wanted to find a way to engage communities. Let this be a grassroots product so that someone with like a fire hat doesn't just come and tell you what you're supposed to do. This is very much in the tradition of this Transition Missoula effort where like neighbors help neighbors, communities help communities, people figure out what their priorities are. And the nice thing about this is that can go to Haiti or Nepal or Tajikistan because the communities can decide how should they spend their very sparse resources. Should it be in preparing for an event, or should it be on building a school or investing in upgraded agricultural practices or whatever? It should be the neighborhood deciding what to do. But neighborhoods can't decide what to do if they don't have access to information in the first place. And then we wanted an efficient platform, and that these days means web stuff, and it should work on your phone. And then we also wanted a way to bring information back into the product from the people who use it. So to look at how people are using this thing and then have that inform how subsequently we upgrade it and modify it, so it can be really responsive to the user's needs. And so we built a template, or we built a proof of concept that's called Missoula Ready. And as soon as I stop blathering on, I'll take you straight to this and we can play around with it and you'll see how it works. But we've already now started building Seattle Ready and King County Ready on the same template. And so what is it? It's a web tool. It's a website where you have a bunch of features that hopefully accomplish all of the tasks that we have in mind. So here again is a very cruddy grab from what it looks like. But basically the components are a map up there and a little bar. You can type in your own address, you can click on the map, or if you're using it on your phone, you could just say, give me this information for the place where I am right now, my current location. So it's customized to a specific place in space. And then you get these tabs right here that tell you your top natural hazards that occur at that place. So basically all the possible hazards besides the crazy ones that are never ever going to happen, the ones that are important to that place. And then you can click on each of those tabs and then you get this interface that has these little dial icons and a little story that we call snuggets because that's the dorky tech speak for a little story. It's a story nugget. So it has a graphical icon and a little story nugget about what that hazard might be like at that place. And there's, you'll see as we go to the site, hopefully it won't be quite so blurry, there's a dial that says what's the worst case scenario for this place? Like what's the most terrible thing for that hazard that could happen here? And what's a kind of typical scenario? For all of these, the typical scenario is nothing happens, but what's a kind of typical hazard that you might see at that place? So we give you a range so you can understand if you're like me and you're a worrier, you want to know what the worst case scenario is. But if you're kind of like calm, cool, and collected, you might want to know, you know, what's the thing I should probably be prepared for because it's the most likely scenario for this place. And then we have how to prepare, this section on exactly what you should do given your exposure to risk at that exact place. And then there's some historical information about past events that have happened there. So you can see what those really look like. How does this work in the background? That's where the fancy science, the commitment to fancy science comes in. But the site elements are the ones are sort of derived from our wish list. Hazard information is based on the very best current science. It's totally location specific. The level of risk is relative to elsewhere in the county, so you'll see that dial, and it's scaled for where we are. So we're not going to compare like the earthquakes here to the earthquakes in Japan or in California. They're about here. They're about our place. And then information about how to prepare and that historic background. Behind the scenes, it's kind of fancy, and I'll zip through this because you may or may not be super interested, but I hope that it will at least confirm to you that this is very grounded in the science. So the first thing you want to do we wanted to do when we were creating the Missoula tool is think about what happens here. What are the hazards that happen here? And it's pretty easy to kind of look through the Missoulian and find out what are the natural disasters that typically happen here. There's flooding, there are wildfires, there are avalanches, and where there are avalanches, there can always be landslides. And then we had to augment that with a little bit of additional science to realize that there's also considerable earthquake hazard in this region. So then once we kind of just looked at the newspaper or talked to people who have lived here for a long time, we compared that against some products that exist that are compulsory for FEMA and other government grant agencies and programs. So every city and county in the United States has to put together these pre-disaster mitigation plans and hazard protection plans to comply with various federal programs. And what these have in them, and they're hideous to track down and even worse to read, but they have a list of hazards in order from what the government thinks is the most likely to the least likely, and the greatest impact to the least impact. So we could cross-check our kind of sense of the community's history against these disaster planning products that are buried in government literature. And it turns out, yes, indeed, these are the main hazards. So then we have a nice list of the hazards that might happen in a place, and we can push to one side all the other possible hazards in the universe, asteroids, strikes, and zombie attacks and things, and not worry about those. And then what we did is hunted down the very best, most cutting edge science about each of those hazards. In some cases, this came from government entities, so like the FEMA flood maps, these are a product for the whole United States. But in other cases, they came from ongoing research at the University of Montana or elsewhere in Western United States. So studies on where do landslides happen, what are the soils in this region, where do earthquakes happen, where are the active faults, what is the latest and greatest seismic stuff. And so we compiled all of the scientific data available for all of the hazards. And you can see, again, probably can't read this, a list of all of the different data sources and data sets that went into each of the hazard tabs. So for wildfire, it's a compilation of all these things. For flood, these things. For earthquake, these things. And there's often different sources of information about, say, historic wildfires versus current wildfire hazard versus what the modelers in the fire lab think is like going to happen over the next decade. And so you want to kind of be able to query all of that information in a variety of different ways.
Rebecca?
Yeah.
So this is just natural disasters, it doesn't include
Correct.
like chemical spills?
That's right. So one of the decisions we made very early in this process was to say we're just going to do natural disasters, in part because that's what we know about the best, in part because those have very disproportionately great impacts over broad areas, and also in part because I'll just be the physicist in the room here and say, like, people are crazy. I can't predict what crazy thing people are going to do. So kind of human initiated disasters are vastly harder to kind of forecast in the way that we can forecast natural disasters, right? I know what the discharge of the Clark Fork River is, and I know what it's historically been, so it's a matter of like some funky math and statistics to say what's the worst flood that can possibly happen, what's a typical flood that has like a recurrence of every 30 years or something. But if you had to ask me what's the probability of somebody smoking crack and driving a train filled with chlorine into the Clark Fork River, that's so hard, it's so impossible to do. Or so, never mind like, you know, a biohazard problem or somebody doing something on purpose that's really, really awful. Those things are too hard to quantify in a way that we can do systematically. So that was like the kind of final straw that we decided, no, we're going to stick with natural hazards, let the people deal with the people, kind of. Yeah. For now. I mean, the way that this works in the back end, it's actually not that hard to modify to do human-related stuff. So we could easily put in, say, the rail lines with a buffer around them and say, like, the hazard of a major rail accident along this corridor is much greater than it is far away from the tracks. I think that's sort of obvious. One of the things we've been playing around with a little bit is doing this with epidemiological information. So you can actually say, like, if there's a flu outbreak, how likely is flu to be in this bigger area like that? But that's a product that's a little ways away still. So for now, it's just natural.
But some of the things that we can do in a man-made disaster might be some of the same things we do in a natural, like, you know,
Totally.
being calm and having some things at home.
Yes, and one of the things that's really obvious that maybe you'll see again if we explore the site a little bit is like the recommendations for how to be prepared for a major snowstorm versus a flood versus an earthquake versus some kind of human-related emergency. They're all kind of the same. Like, talk to your family about an evacuation plan, put together enough water and food and warm stuff to survive on your own for 3 days. Like, these are very basic preparedness measures that work regardless of the event. So if you happen to be prepared for the storm scenario for your home and neighborhood, you will likely also be prepared for a big chemical spill maybe, or like the highway getting closed off or something like that. So you're right about that. So this is really the most technical slide I'll show you. Some of the information that is in the background we had to like modify in various ways to make it work when you query it with the map thing. And if you're interested in that, we can come back to this. But here's an example. I'll just walk you through how we made the earthquake layer. So here is a figure from a pretty famous paper that shows all of those peak ground accelerations and important faults in western Montana. This is Missoula County. So we clip that out. We look at where the faults are, the known mapped faults that have been active in the past 10,000 years or so. And then we actually compared the ground, the like modeled ground acceleration, so the modeled shaking for different scenarios on these faults from different scientific sources. And we found they were all pretty crummy. And you can see these are two different important sources of scientific information about earthquake shaking. You know, they're vaguely similar, but they're pretty different in the details, one from the other, and they're also neither very good. So based on our own research on earthquake faults in this area, both of these underestimate the likelihood of shaking in this region, so we augmented them with our own research results. And we converted these to this scale called Mercalli intensity. And the reason why we did that is because this comes with qualitative description. So intensity 8 means buildings break, there are major structural flaws in buildings and they have to be taken down and rebuilt. Intensity 2 is you feel like something weird just happened and you don't know what it was. And so the range of these is important because it has words. They have words that go with them that are about human experiences. So by converting everything to this Mercalli scale, we could convert them into story nuggets that would be meaningful. And then in the background, this is what the software is doing when you type in your address. It's pulling all of these layers, querying them for the location, pulling the story nuggets that correspond to those hazard intensities, sending them through all sorts of things until pop, out you get is your little report for your location. So I threw a pin on the library here, and I'll read this to you again because it's probably blurry. What you can see there are tabs: wildfire, flooding, winter weather, summer weather, earthquake, landslide. And what you'll see is, like, for wildfire, it's way down here, low on the dial, because we're in the middle of town. So there's not going to be a giant wildfire in the middle of town. Worst case scenario is there'll be a lot of smoke at this location and that will be uncomfortable for people. So this is really, I think, helpful because you realize if I live at the library, I'm not going to worry about being prepared for a wildfire. But if you put a pin in a different place, like in one of the rural parts of our county, what you'll see is if it's in a wooded area, that this dial will point higher, and then there'll be safety issues and a bunch of recommendations about how to be fire prepared for your location. And so what we want this to work like is some of these really high-tech hazard analysis tools. This is one that exists for the San Francisco Bay Area, but it's for technical users. But that looks more like your favorite weather forecast app. So what we're doing is taking the technical scientific information, just like meteorologists do, right? They get these feeds of numbers of pressure, atmospheric pressure and moisture in the atmosphere from the National Weather Service, and they translate it into your nice weather app on your phone that says, bring an umbrella today. So that's exactly the model we want, except for longer time scales and natural hazards. The technical information assimilated and turned into a pleasant, easy to use forecast that helps you be prepared. And so what's the outcome? Well, we hope that the outcome is more resilient communities, that people have now access to the information they need to make judicious and efficient decisions about what they should be prepared for, how much effort they should put into that preparedness, and how to work together as a neighborhood to be resilient in the case of natural disasters. So what you guys can do, use the site, have a look, see what's on the menu for your neighborhood, use the recommendations to get prepared. Most of our recommendations, in fact all of them, cost $100 or less probably, and are things that like a neighborhood could get together and trim brush for the less able people in that neighborhood, or you could have a work day or whatever. And these small measures really make a huge difference, both in kind of building the community spirit and in saving lives and protecting economic value. So if we go straight to the site, which I think we should be able to do, except we just migrated this from my computer, but I'll just go straight to it on the browser, if that works. Yeah, we could just turn the light on, and I'll try my very best. I think that the site is here, and you can go, it's hazardready.org, and here it is. So here's Missoula Ready, and we can type in an address. This is a little, not much comes up until you type in an address, so I'm happy to do mine, or you can click on the map, which maybe, except this browser doesn't like that very much. We'll see if this works. If not, there's few enough of us that we could all huddle around my computer. I'll say the university. Let's see what. Okay, so now we have a map of the university that reminds me where I clicked. And I have all of these tabs, and I can click on any one of them, and it tells me what's a potential event, what's the worst case scenario, how to prepare. This is something that the Missoula City and County Emergency Managers helped us write, because that's what they want you guys to know about that particular disaster. And then here are some photos and information about past events. And then here's this kind of generic information about a supply kit and places you can go to for more information. And I can just click through the tabs and get the same kind of information for each type of hazard. So hopefully you guys find this useful in the sense that it takes all of that fancy science that we have, and it makes it easy to understand and helps you to be more prepared. So use it, please, and spread the word. Yeah.
We hear quite often about this gigantic volcano
Yeah.
underneath Yellowstone.
Yes.
Is that factored into this?
So look, it's actually, if I could pretend that I could see into the future, because I would predict that someone would ask that question. Everyone asks that question every time.
Of course.
What you'll notice is it's not even on our tabs, because it is so incredibly unlikely to happen that it wasn't worth putting a tab on it. It is, you should not, if it's not on the tabs, do not worry about it. Like, worry about gum disease or, getting your 5 fruits and vegetables. Do not worry about the Yellowstone volcano. It is not going to happen. And if it were going to happen, we would probably get a good 50 years of warning on it. So you would have plenty of time to we could quickly program in a tab, for sure.
Move to another continent.
Yeah, exactly. I hear Maine is nice.
I'm
Yeah.
looking at it on my phone and it's really cool.
Thanks.
So I noticed in New Orleans, when they had their disaster from the hurricane,
Yeah.
a lot of it was contributed towards the building of levees.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like a man-made disaster in a way. So
Yeah, I would count that as a natural disaster, exacerbated by man-made things. Yeah. So we're definitely thinking about doing this in lots of places, and New Orleans is really high on the list. So that's a perfect example. If before the giant disaster of Hurricane Katrina, if you had gone through all the government websites and the science sites and stuff, you knew what you're looking for, and you knew how to assimilate that technical information, you would absolutely know that New Orleans was a disaster waiting to happen, and that a big hurricane was gonna just level that place in terrible ways. But did the people who lived there have access to that information? I mean, nominally, yes, but practically, no. It wasn't in a form that people could get it easily or use it or understand it. And to me, this is a philosophical position, but I find that deeply amoral, unethical. People shouldn't be required to take certain actions, but they should have access to the information they need to make the right choices about what to do.
There was a book, but you had to read the book.
Yeah, there was a book, but you had to read the book. And it's hard to read books, and not everybody reads books. But almost everybody checks their weather forecast once in a while. And so that's the kind of the level that we want this information to be. And you don't have to check it every day, because we only change these hazards seasonally. Like flood season is in the spring. And so you could check this once a year and kind of have a good sense of where you're at in terms of hazards and preparedness. So it's a pretty low bar to being informed, I hope.
Actually, the Sacramento Delta is a bigger risk than New Orleans was.
Yes, it's all below sea level.
And I have a friend who's a college professor.
Who's maybe
and I
named Johnny
warned her-
Moore.
And I warned her that she
Oh.
was in a high-risk area because California was facing El Nino.
Yeah,
And El Nino in the new age, where a 100-year floodplain
yeah,
has a tough to define.
Right.
And she was, I won't tell you exactly what her response is, because it's not fit for public television, but.
I tried
she-
to keep
she
it clean for
had-
that reason.
This is a very, very smart person, and she had
Yeah.
no idea
Yeah.
that she and her family were at risk, and I told her in a well-crafted sentence or two.
So in my experience, this is how people have typically found out about their exposure to risk is kind of word of mouth, a friendly friend, a New Yorker article about the Cascadia earthquake that had big impact in the Seattle area. But if you don't happen to get lucky, to hear that from a friend, you know, where do you go to be informed? And so that's the motivation behind this tool.
So, say this had been available for 80.
Yeah. I think that's a big ask, but okay, let's pretend
I mean,
that we
just-
live in a different world.
It just seems like so many of the problems there are infrastructure, and that what could or in those two graphs that you had with the people, you know,
Yeah.
with all the deaths, what could those people have done to prepare?
So, you know, this is I think a deep discussion.
Yeah.
The trivial answer to that is,
Not
if people knew what was going on, they would be prepared and fewer of them would die. Now, of course, there are socio-political and economic barriers to preparedness, but having worked in many developing nations over many years now, my feeling is if people understand their exposure to risk, they will find a way. So even at the grassroots level, like villages get together and find ways to be prepared for their greatest risks. This is something humans have done for thousands of generations, right? You save seeds for drought time, or you stockpile food for famine time, or you help your neighbors to be prepared for things. And I think some of those measures, if they don't come from the top down, if the Haitian government can't provide the help that people need, but people understand their exposure to risk, they'll take care of themselves. And maybe that's a little naive, but so one of the interesting things that happened in Nepal, and the government of Nepal is nearly as corrupt and worthless as the government of Haiti. In Nepal, there was a really strong grassroots movement for earthquake resilience based on a few NGOs not doing this on the web, but doing this by word of mouth. One of which was a program to train local masons to put string into their mud and stone buildings. And what string does when kind of tied around each course, it certainly doesn't save houses, but it adds maybe another 15 to 25 seconds that wall will stay up. And when you live in a stone house that's a quarter the size of this room, 30 seconds is enough time to get out the door. And in that earthquake, you could see, in the aftermath of that earthquake, there were whole villages where almost nobody died because they had put string in there.
Uncle Joe the Mason always used string with his.
Yeah.
Really?
And so, and we, one of the NGOs that did the string project, they thought in the early days, which was, in the 90s, early 90s, they thought those masons would charge more to build houses better with earthquake resilience, but they didn't. What they did was they charged the same amount, and the word of mouth worked through the markets of those villages so that nobody would actually hire masons who didn't use string after a few rounds. And so it turned out that whole villages had the kind of advanced construction, earthquake resistant construction, and were safe. And then villages who hadn't somehow gotten the word of mouth, they all fell down, everybody died. I mean, it's not perfect, right? In some of those villages, huge landslides just wiped out the whole village. String, no string,
Yeah.
doesn't matter. But it helps. And I pretty firmly believe that individuals and neighbors and communities and families will take care of themselves if they know what they need to do, even if the government doesn't help, doesn't provide. And that's not always true, and some people are so on the margin of surviving to their next meal that there's literally nothing they
No
can do.
seeds to save.
But in that case, like, an earthquake's not their biggest problem. They shouldn't be doing earthquake resistant design, they should be finding food. So, and that's their choice to make.
And when they think about which mason to hire, they have a conversation about earthquake preparedness.
Yes.
It's not much of a conversation.
No, but it actually, I mean, I know that saves lives. I
Right.
know that
Because they're
saves
heading out the
people's
door
lives.
5 seconds faster.
Totally.
That's a
Yeah.
wonderful story.
And you might even also say, like, at the next level, you know, if people understand that that good governance isn't happening and the government isn't providing them with the means to survive through a disaster, then maybe they demand that of their government. Maybe they say, you know what, you guys are supposed to be helping us be prepared or whatever. Or, you know, please don't cite this nuclear power plant on this fault because we can see on our little map or webpage or whatever that this is a really bad place to put a nuclear power plant. Or whatever. Lots of, yeah.
In your experience with seeing a lot of earthquakes, like, we have a lot of large pine trees around. Do they tend to fall down if in a serious earthquake? Have you noticed?
You know, it's like, I think your chances of being killed by a building is more than by a tree. In an earthquake, trees are really flexible, so they kind of waggle around
And survive.
yeah. That would be low on my list.
So, in the last 10 days, we've had 4 days in which a certain natural hazard called for changes in the way people were doing things all day.
Hey, you think he's natural, huh?
For 3 of those 4 days.
Talking about the
And on the
erosion.
4th day, it called for a certain subject population to seek shelter.
Yeah,
And
can
it's
you,
not among your list.
can you be more specific?
Air quality.
Oh, okay. So, like, the air quality here, we do have a section on air quality under the wildfire tab, and it does, like, hot link you to the current air quality
Yeah.
report.
What about winter
And
inversions?
it does talk about it, but we don't have that in the winter weather tab, which maybe we should.
Well, I wonder, actually, I do wonder, because obviously we didn't have a wildfire
Yeah.
weekend before last.
No, totally,
But
and
we
it
had
is
we had 4
different.
days of a stage 1 alert, and on one
Correct,
of the days
yeah,
it
it
went
was
up
gross.
to stage 2 alert.
That's a
Which
really
means
good
in
point.
stage
We
2
should
alert-
add that to the winter weather tab.
And we get it every winter.
Yeah.
My skiing group.
And who would think of that? I'm on the air
Yeah.
quality advisory board, so I think
Yeah.
about it, but,
No,
because I
but
get
I
a
mean,
thing. And I
please-
thought,
Yeah.
I got this thing, but I got it because I'm on the advisory board, and I don't know anybody else that got it.
Yeah.
And nobody else has said anything about it, and I never saw it before I was on the.
It's on the, like, National Weather Service weather feed.
Oh, I
so-
know where to find it, but I didn't know to go look for it.
No, we should put that on there. That's
No,
a
no,
great
but-
point. I should say, this is so much a work in progress. It launched almost exactly a year. It launched in March. And so we're constantly trying to make it better, and that's something that we absolutely should be in there.
I wouldn't want you to think I thought it was anything less than totally great.
Yeah, but great things can always be greater, right? And it's, you know, a piece of all of these factors that we really, really care about is that it be responsive to the community, because I think it doesn't actually do it doesn't do some of the community building stuff if it's just like top-down, blah, here's information. It's really great if it can respond to like the things that people experience and care about, so, for sure. Thank you.
I went skiing yesterday with a group, and we all felt that we were more tired
Yeah.
than usual.
Oh, because of the bad air quality, you
That's
think?
what we were thinking, and that it really, it was interesting that everyone experienced being more tired.
I'm more tired than I normally am too, and I thought it was just because I am a
Just thought it was
cranky
'cause
old
I was
bat. Yeah.
So you're working on a similar project in Seattle, it looks
Yes,
like?
it's scheduled for launch in probably early March.
So the I've been intrigued by the Cascadian subduction zone issue and the tsunami. The slide you showed earlier of Japan and Sumatra, were those deaths, were they related to tsunami, or is that just earthquake?
That's the total deaths, and of the total deaths, about 2/3 are the tsunami.
So
Actually.
Japan's interesting because they have this unbroken link of cultural knowledge that's been enshrined. You got stone monuments around
Right.
the islands that says, do not build below this spot because the last tsunami came this high. And this is a culture that respects its elders, and they did build below. And I'm not sure, maybe they didn't build as into the tsunami zone as much as they might otherwise would. But I think about Seattle, I think about the Cascadian subduction zone. I mean, something like a tsunami, if you're in the path of the tsunami, I mean, that's pretty tough to prepare for. I mean, to get out of there as soon as you can, but your property's pretty much gonna be toast.
Sure.
How are you addressing that in King County?
So you guys, this is top secret. Cannot leave this room besides being on MCAT. So, this is the Seattle site. It's still under development. I clicked on a point that was like out towards the coast, and under the earthquake tab, you see the Cascadia quake and the scenario for that. And then this says, you know, here's the tsunami zone. The point I clicked on is in the tsunami zone. And then we haven't probably fleshed this out completely. But also it says, you know, how to prepare. And one of the things about tsunamis is that water waves move considerably slower than seismic waves. And so the big thing in the tsunami zone and how to prepare for the points on our map that are in the tsunami run-up domain is, if you feel shaking, go to the high ground immediately. Do not wait and see, because depending on exactly where the earthquake happened, you could have, 5 minutes or so. And because the coast in that Puget Sound area is quite steep, it's probably enough time for, actually there's a brand new study out that's really interesting that we're trying to fold into the tsunami thing. It actually estimates the distance people at an average walking pace can cover, and so we were able to like map out the areas where if you walk, as soon as you feel the shaking, you can get out of the tsunami run-up zone, versus actually the coast of Oregon, because it's much more gradually sloping. There are many parts of the coast of Oregon where, unless you have a vehicle, you will not be able to get out of the tsunami run-up zone, like by human powered, by walking or running, because it's too far. So what can you do? You're host, but you should at least know that you're in that area, right? I mean, it's still helpful to know your host, I guess. There's a point at which you're just host, but.
Yeah. So all that knowledge in Japan and that, that cultural legacy that's passed on, how much was that really incorporated and mitigated the impacts of that?
So you could see, I mean, many, I think it's a factor of 3. I could go back to that slide. Maybe a factor of 5 times fewer people were killed in that event. So right there, like, it helped for sure. Some of the details of that Japanese earthquake were really interesting. So, and this is getting in the weeds of the science I do and not necessarily this talk, but who cares? I think it's interesting. They had designed a lot of the seawalls for the estimated tsunami wave height, and they were good. They were correct. What they hadn't accounted for is what's called the static drop of a place. So in Japan, during that earthquake, the whole entire island of Japan dropped by about 1.5 meters.
Really?
And in many places, the tsunami overtopped the seawall by, 1 to 2 meters, but then it destroyed the seawall. So they got the height right, they just didn't account for the fact that the whole island got lower in the earthquake, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
amazing.
So,
A meter and a half.
yeah, it was, the earthquake itself, the slip was almost 40 meters, so the seafloor moved laterally by 40 meters in some places. Which, you know, there's a limit to what you can be prepared for.
Yeah.
So all of Japan moved down by sort of 1.5 meters
Down
and
and over.
moved to the east by, you know, in some places like 10 meters or so. Crazy, huh?
You know, on that table you had with the charts with the death,
Yeah, the death chart we call it.
you know, what
In
what was
fact.
hard for me to envision is what proportion of the deaths were caused by the structures collapsing, and what percent maybe were caused by not having the food, resources.
Yeah, so we didn't break it out
Medicine.
by disease, but actually the whole like disease after a disaster is kind of overrated, except way after, like in Haiti, this cholera outbreak thing, this is bad form by the UN, but most of the deaths in the 2 magnitude 9s were, the vast majority were collapsed infrastructure plus the tsunami. And again, with the tsunami being more like 2/3 of the fatalities. Haiti, no tsunami, pretty much all the deaths were collapsed infrastructure. Yeah. And then, I mean, it depends on how you want to code things. Like if you're trapped in a collapsed building and then you die of dehydration, what exactly you want to call that? Probably, I would just call that collapsed infrastructure, because if you weren't stuck in that building, you could go get a drink of water.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks for coming. Thank you all very much. Spread the word, check it out.
It'd be interesting if you could, if a person could sign up on the website.
They can,
to
you
get
can.
alerts.
Yes, yeah.
Cool.
You get a seasonal customized update at the moment, and we're working on whether or not we want to push like real-time alerts. The city and county emergency services have something called Smart 911 that is designed to do like emergent alerts, like evacuation notices or stuff like that. And so we don't need to do that, but a kind of like, well, there's been a huge snowpack and there's a lot of wind loading, so the avalanche danger has gone up. We do provide that, yeah. So sign up. It's good for, gives you lots of gray hair.
Art took care of that, thanks.
Do you anticipate with climate change that you'll have to update these things more?
Yeah, we're also really trying to think a lot about how to do that, because it's definitely changing the likelihood of certain kinds of events. Earthquakes, no, but storms, yes, and floods, yes.
Fracking related
Hurricane.
Yeah, not here though. If we have
Seems to have some
Oklahoma
effect in
ready, Oklahoma ready, we'll have to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
But again, this is where we like have a very strong commitment to using the most current science. And that really informs both the climate change scenarios and things like fracking-induced seismicity and stuff.
So besides promoting Missoula Ready, I think it would be good to promote Smart 911.
Yeah, there's a
It's-
link right on there that says click over and register for Smart 911 night right now.
Yeah.
So
I did.
we're trying to kind of track like how many people come through Missoula Ready to Smart 911 in the hopes that it will be like another vehicle that will inspire people to, because I think fewer people have signed up for Smart 911 than they would like. So
But
do
I
that
haven't
too.
heard anything.
Existed.
I haven't gotten anything, because I guess nothing has happened.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
An email just asking to make sure it was.
Yeah, confirmation.
Yeah, and you're supposed to update your,
So, you
thingy every once in a while.
So what kind of outreach are you doing with the website?
So right now we're kind of just trying to spread the word through word of mouth. When we launched, there was a kind of a big media push, so it was in the Missoulian and the Independent and stuff like that. And then every once in a while, city and county emergency services will post it on their Facebook page and stuff. But it's really just kind of like, yeah, check it out, do this. My sense is from this is kind of the first of its kind in the world, but for some vaguely related products, what they tend to see are like pulses of interest when there is something going on. And so our strategy is really like at flood season to try to get the word out again, and at wildfire season to try to get the word out again. And right now it's just inversion season, so everyone's too tired and grumpy to.
An avalanche.
The air quality actually has been quite excellent the last couple of days.
Yeah, that's nice.
So is Hazard Ready, is that a company then?
It's sort of a company. I mean, you're looking at it.
Okay, so it's not like a startup that you have, it's
Well,
an
so-
incubator and you're.
So this actually creating the website was a master's project that I supervise, and my student and I are trying to turn it into a little startup. I don't know, but we don't know what we're doing, so. But Seattle was a big step for us.
Oh, yeah.
Implementing Seattle Ready is really exciting, and we're just gonna try to go to lots of different places and convince them to make
So
a
what
ready page.
exactly do we put in our search bar to get to that?
HazardReady.org.
Does MissoulaReady.org get there too?
HazardReady.org will get you straight to Missoula Ready.
Okay.
Yeah. Or if you want to be like absolutely perfect about it, hazardready.org/Missoula. But right now it just redirects because the Missoula page is the only one that's live. So, yeah. Thanks. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, there is information about transition streets if you'd like to find out about that, so that you could then get together with your neighbors and explore this and some other things and become more resilient and prepared. Thank you all for coming.